This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. And in a while, we'll be with CJ Hero. But first, the headlines. India has declared a new COVID variant to be of concern after nearly 24 cases have been detected across the country so far. Climate change will fundamentally reshape life on Earth in the coming decades, even if humans can tame planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions. That's according to a landmark draft report from the UN's climate science advisors obtained by AFP. And famine is already present in 4 countries, but millions more people are at risk. The World Food Programme warned, underscoring the need for urgent funding and humanitarian access to reach those in need. And Hong Kong pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily announced it was printing its final edition after authorities froze its assets using a sweeping new national security law, silencing the city's most China-critical media outlet. First to India, where the country has declared a new coronavirus variant to be of concern. After nearly 24 cases had been detected across the country so far, the health ministry there said the variant A1-1 identified locally as Delta Plus and first identified in Europe has been found in at least 22 cases across Maharashtra, Kerala, and Madhya Pradesh states. Health experts have warned that the Delta Plus variant may trigger a third COVID-19 wave in India. Take a look.
If a potential mutation happens, it will again be explosive, can be more explosive, or can be less explosive, but it will lead to a clear wave. Now, do we have that warning of a potential variant coming in? Answer is yes. There are some reports which are coming of a newly coined term Delta Plus. Now, that is not a term which WHO or CDC has as yet to sort of put it as an official term, but we are sort of using it. Now, that is a further mutation from the existing Delta virus. And the problem with this is it can be even more transmissible.
The Delta Plus variant has been formed due to a mutation of the Delta strain or the B16172 variant, which was first found in India and believed to be the reason behind a vicious second wave of the virus in the country. Now, here in the country, all COVID-19 vaccines available are effective and can provide protection against all coronavirus variants, including the highly contagious Delta. Food and Drug Administration Director General Eric Dominguez said as he urged the public to get their jabs. In a briefing with President Duterte, Dominguez said while there is a decreasing efficacy of vaccines as the virus mutates, vaccines still remain useful in protecting the population. In the Philippines, there are 17 cases detected with the Delta variant as of June 21. Take a look.
The data for Pfizer shows that for the UK variant, yung Pfizer vaccine po, mataas pa rin, nare-retain niya yung mataas na efficacy rate niya of 93%. Pagdating po doon sa Delta variant, although bumababa po ng konti, meron pa rin naman pong 88% no, na efficacy against the Delta variant. So there's a decreasing efficacy as we get more mutations, but hindi naman po completely nawawala ang bisa ng bakuna. It's still a useful vaccine. Yun naman pong AstraZeneca vaccine, ang nakita po nila na overall efficacy niya for the UK variant is about 66%, at nung tiningnan po for the Delta variant, it's about 60%. So nagagamit pa rin naman po talaga, may protection pa rin na ibibigay.
So itong AstraZeneca pati yung yung isa, they are
yun pong Pfizer.
Well, Pfizer effective, at least it gives you an ample protection against.
Well, sir, ngayon sir, actually po ongoing din naman ang study ng mga itong bakuna like Janssen, Moderna, Sinovac, Sinopharm, and Sputnik on the efficacy nila against the Delta variant. Kaya lang wala pa po talagang nasusulat na report. No? But initial reports indicate that they are also useful. But of course, we expect that it will be a little lower than the original efficacy dun po sa original na variant po ng ating bakuna.
Yung Delta po, as I have mentioned, is 60% increased transmission over Alpha or yung UK variant, which was already 60% increased transmission over the original virus from Wuhan. So mabagsik po talaga to. If we thought Alpha was mabagsik yung UK variant, mas mabagsik po itong Indian variant, yung Delta. And of course, there's also the finding that yung mga partially vaccinated, yung one dose pa lang, nahahawa pa rin po sila. Kasi mukhang itong Delta really needs 2 doses para maprotektahan po ng maayos. Yung one dose po is not very good at protecting against Delta. Sabihin ko rin po kasi yung napag-usapan yung face shields, the Delta variant is also 40% more infectious outdoors, 60% more infectious indoors. So it would be nice po to have an extra layer of security na even if hindi naman required, the tag will still recommend to continue to use face shields even outdoors, especially with the threat of the Delta variant.
Apo.
Now, White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci has warned that the highly contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus is the greatest threat to America's attempt to eradicate the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a look.
Symptomatic. The transmissibility is unquestionably greater than the wild-type SARS-CoV-2 as well as the Alpha variant. It is associated with an increased disease severity as reflected by hospitalization risk compared to Alpha. And in lab tests associated with moderate decreased neutralization by sera from previously infected and vaccinated individuals, but efficacy, as I'll get to in a moment. Among whom is this taking place? The Imperial College of London did a study in over 100,000 homes and looked and found that youth were driving the UK surge, with a 5-fold higher positivity among children 5 to 12 and young adults 18 to 24 versus people older than 65 years old. And one of our tools, the effectiveness of the vaccines, in this case, 2 weeks after the second dose of Pfizer-BioNTech, was 88% effective against the Delta and 93% effective against the Alpha when you're dealing with symptomatic disease. Next slide. When you look at hospitalizations, again, both the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Oxford-AstraZeneca are between 92 and 96% effective. Similar to the situation in the UK, the Delta variant is currently the greatest threat in the U.S. to our attempt to eliminate COVID-19. Good news, our vaccines are effective against the Delta variant.
We know our vaccines work against this variant. However, this variant represents a set of mutations that could lead to future mutations that evade our vaccine. And that's why it's more important than ever to get vaccinated now to stop the chain of infection, the chain of mutations that could lead to a more dangerous variant.
Epidemiologists are also worried about the rise of the Delta variant, which is more transmissible than past strains and badly hit India, Britain, and other countries. It now accounts for at least 20% of U.S. cases. Current vaccines remain highly effective against the variant if a person is fully vaccinated. But there are fears that under-vaccinated parts of the country could incubate fresh surges. Fauci also said these spikes would likely remain localized and not close to the same magnitude of the three major waves the United States has experienced since the spring of 2020.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization said the highly contagious Delta variant is the fastest and fittest coronavirus strain that will pick off the most vulnerable people. Take a look.
Severe disease. And Delta variant, the other variants, but this particular Delta variant is faster, it is fitter. It will pick off the more vulnerable more efficiently than previous variants. And therefore, if there are vulnerable people left without vaccination, they remain even at further risk. All of these viruses have been lethal in their own regard. This virus has the potential to be more lethal because it's more efficient in the way it transmits between humans, and it will eventually find those vulnerable individuals who will become severely ill, have to be hospitalized and potentially die. And we can protect those people now with relatively small transfers of vaccine from the global supply. We can protect those vulnerable people, those frontline workers. And the fact that we haven't, as Director General has said again and again, is a catastrophic moral failure at a global level.
Now, in other news, the leader of Australia's state of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, announced the tightening of restrictions in Sydney, with mandatory masks returning and residents banned from traveling outside the city. Take a look.
Everybody, as at 8 p.m. last night, there were 10 cases of community transmission in New South Wales. 9 of those you'd already been made aware of yesterday. The 10th one is an additional person that attended that party where the worker from Bondi Junction also attended. So they are the 10 cases to 8 p.m. last night. Unfortunately, since 8 p.m. last night, New South Wales has recorded an additional 13 cases of community transmission. Restrictions that we're announcing today will be in place from 4 p.m. today for an additional week. So obviously we had said that the mask wearing restrictions had to be in place for another week until Wednesday midnight. This will now apply to these restrictions that I'm announcing today. So no more than 5 visitors per household, including children. At hospitality venues, no vertical consumption. All people must be seated wherever you are at any setting. We do not want mingling. Mingling will mean transferring the virus.
More than 30 people have been diagnosed with COVID-19 since the cluster emerged in the city's Bondi Beach area last week, the latest in a string of flare-ups that highlight Australia's difficulty in extinguishing outbreaks. New South Wales State Premier Gladys Berejiklian announced the new restrictions that will apply for the next week, including the immediate ban on non-essential travel out of Sydney and limits on social gatherings. Authorities stopped short of ordering the closure of restaurants and bars, but singing and dancing are out, while major events can still go ahead with stadium capacity limited to 50%. Australia has been among the world's most successful countries in containing COVID-19, with just over 30,000 cases and 910 deaths. The latest outbreak has been linked to a driver for international flight crews who contacted the Delta variant of the virus, which was first identified in India.
That heat right makes you gag.
A panel of experts convened by the top U.S. health agency will hold a meeting today or Wednesday U.S. time to review data surrounding more than 300 confirmed cases of heart muscle inflammation among adolescents and young adults after receiving mRNA COVID vaccines. The committee, hosted by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, will hear a risk-benefit analysis as researchers explore whether the shots can cause myocarditis, as well as cases of inflammation of the heart lining, pericarditis. Israel was the first country to identify a possible link. A previous meeting on the issue, convened on June 10 by the Food and Drug Administration, heard that most of the cases were among young men and occurred within a week of the second dose. The Pfizer vaccine is currently the only shot authorized in adolescents aged 12 and up. Myocarditis is known to be seasonal with higher incidence in summer months, potentially linked to enteroviruses, and is estimated to affect 1 per 100,000 children per year.
In other news, more than 150 employees at the Houston Methodist Hospital in Texas were fired or resigned after failing to comply with orders to get a COVID-19 vaccination to continue working there, according to a hospital spokeswoman. Officials, Houston Methodist told its staff they needed to have received a COVID-19 vaccination by June 7 or be suspended for 2 weeks. Jennifer Bridges, the nurse and spokesperson for the former employees of Houston Methodist Hospital in Baytown, who resigned or were fired because they refused to get the COVID-19 vaccine, says she wants to set a precedent. Take a look.
After many efforts to try to negotiate with Methodist, they wouldn't hear us. So we decided to start a lawsuit where I contacted a lawyer. 117 people joined us initially. Now we're about to add another 70. We want Methodist to be held accountable for their actions. We want the public to see that we should not have lost our jobs and that Methodist is not properly giving people informed consent or talking about adverse reactions. We want the public to be properly informed of this shot before they take it themselves, because the risks for me are too great. I've personally seen adverse reactions with employees and patients, everything from severe headaches to blood clots to paralysis to even death. And at my age, my benefits from getting this vaccine aren't much at all because I only have a 1% chance of dying from the virus anyways. So the risks are so much greater that when you add up risk versus benefits, it just doesn't equal out. I don't want the chance of ruining the rest of my life over this shot that I do not need. They're the first hospital that did this, and everybody is waiting on board to see if they can do it next. We want to hopefully win this battle so the federal government has to enforce laws, and we hope to save the rest of the nation from going through the same anxiety-provoked situation that we went through.
Nearly 200 staff had been suspended, the New York Times reported, and protests were staged against the mandatory vaccine rule. Nearly 200 staff had been suspended, again, according to the New York Times. Now, last month, 117 staff members filed a lawsuit against the hospital, accusing it of forcing its employees to be human guinea pigs as a condition for continued employment. The lawsuit was dismissed by a judge who said the vaccine safety was not at issue and that Texas law only protects employees from refusing to commit a crime. Houston houses the world's largest medical complex, the Texas Medical Center, a sprawling district that includes hospitals and research universities. The medical center employs more than 106,000 healthcare workers in all and sees some 10 million patients a year.
Climate change will fundamentally reshape life on Earth in the coming decades, even if humans can tame planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions. That is according to a landmark draft report from the UN's climate science advisors obtained by AFP. Species extinction, more widespread disease, unlivable heat, ecosystem collapse, cities menaced by rising seas. These and other devastating climate impacts are accelerating and bound to become painfully obvious before a child born today turns 30. The choices societies make now will determine whether our species thrives or simply survives. As the 21st century unfolds, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says in a draft report seen exclusively by AFP. But dangerous thresholds are closer than once thought, and dire consequences stemming from decades of unbridled or carbon pollution are unavoidable in the short term. The worst is yet to come, affecting our children's and grandchildren's lives much more than our own, according to the report. It also warned that previous major climate shocks dramatically altered the environment and wiped out most species, raising the question of whether humanity is sowing the seeds of its own demise. It says life on Earth can recover from a drastic climate shift by evolving into new species and creating new ecosystems. And the news continues here in Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Your weekly dose of entrepreneurial inspiration to update you on the latest developments in the world of business. Get up close and personal with CEOs and thought leaders to help you discover valuable insights, sharpen your instincts for smart decision making with the latest markets and economic trends, disruptive ideas, global innovation, social entrepreneurship, and other leading-edge business ideas. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business, from vision to action.
Coming to you live from the Philippine Arena. Again, welcome to the news. The United States government was pleased that President Rodrigo Duterte decided to postpone the termination of the Visiting Forces Agreement, raising hopes that the agreement will continue. In our program, Bali Talakayan, Philippine Ambassador to U.S. Jose Manuel Romualdez said this will be advantageous to both our countries. Take a look.
Mutually advantageous to both our countries dahil natitraining naman yung ating mga armed forces at ang sinabi nga sa akin ni Secretary Lorenzana, very happy naman yung ating mga sundalo. Alam ko si former Senate President Juan Ponce Enrile kausap si Presidente on television at nagbigay siya ng pahayag ng tungkol sa US, no? Pero tinanong ko siya, tinawagan ko si Senate President Enrile at sinabi niya sa akin na in his view, walang mawawala sa atin sa Visiting Forces Agreement. So kinonvey ko yan kay Presidente nung isang araw na mismo si Senate President Enrile, nagtingin niya itong Visiting Forces Agreement ay nothing to lose, everything to gain in terms of our soldiers being trained and also being able to work dahil meron tayong mutual defense treaty. No? So it's always good to yung interoperability ng ating mga soldiers and be able to communicate. Kailangan rin natin na meron tayong relasyon sa matagal na nating kaibigan ng Amerika. 75 years nga is this year. Yun ang ating milestone na celebrate this year, 75 years of our diplomatic relations with the United States. So it is good that we have this kind of relationship with the U.S. And it's also good that we have a relationship with whom they call now as their competitor in China for our own advantage and our security. Dahil nandiyan tayo sa Asia, siyempre neighbor natin ang China.
President Duterte relayed his decision to suspend the termination last June 14 while he studies, and both sides addressed his concerns about some aspects of the security pact.
In other news, severe hunger hit southern Madagascar as communities witness an almost total disappearance of food sources, creating a full-blown nutrition emergency. People have resorted to desperate survival measures like eating locusts, raw red cactus fruits, or wild leaves. And for the first time ever, pockets of the highest acute food insecurity levels, IPC Phase 5, or catastrophe have been recorded, signaling deepening hunger. Take a look.
The malnutrition rates on average has gone over the past 3 months from 8 to 16% on average in all the districts. But in some districts, it has gone up to 27%. This is alarming. This is life-threatening. And whichever way you look at it, this is starvation happening before our eyes.
Unexpected sandstorms have buried croplands and pastures, undermining any possibility of securing a source of food. Vast swathes of arable land have been transformed into wasteland. The lives of children are at stake as the nutrition situation among under-5s deteriorates to alarming levels. Most of the southern districts are in a nutrition emergency as acute malnutrition has almost doubled over the last 4 months, from 9 to 16%. The number of children admitted for treatment for severe acute malnutrition in the Grand Sud in first quarter of 2021 was quadruple the 5-year average, according to the Ministry of Health survey from March 2021. Now, children with acute malnutrition are 4 times more likely to die than healthy children. Food security and nutrition in southern Madagascar have been at alarming levels since the start of the annual hunger season in October 2020. Now, the situation is expected to worsen further, putting millions of lives at risk.
Famine is already present in 4 countries, but millions more people are at risk, according to the World Food Program on Tuesday, underscoring the need for urgent funding and humanitarian access to reach those in need. Recent analysis by the UN agency reveals 41 million people in 43 countries are teetering on the very edge of famine, up from 27 million 2 years ago. Take a look.
The number of people teetering on the brink of famine has risen from 34 million projected at the beginning of the year to 41 million projected as of June. Without immediate emergency food assistance, they too face starvation, as the slightest shock will push them over the cliff into famine conditions. These 41 million are people who are in IPC Phase 4 emergency. But there's another category that this year is already facing famine-like conditions. That number stands at 584,000 people. These are people in Ethiopia's Tigray region, Madagascar, particularly the southern part, South Sudan, especially now as we are now at the height of the lean season in that country, and Yemen.
Hunger has risen due to conflict, climate change, and economic shocks, according to the World Food Program. However, soaring prices for basic foods have also compounded the situation, with the global cost of maize rising almost 90% year on year, for example. In many countries, currency depreciation is also a factor, the agency added. This has driven prices even higher, stoking food insecurity in places such as Lebanon, Nigeria, Sudan, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe.
In other news, Hong Kong pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily announced it was printing its final edition after authorities froze its assets using a sweeping new national security law, silencing the city's most China-critical media outlet. Take a look. The decision is the latest blow to Hong Kong's freedoms and will deepen unease over whether the International Finance Center can remain a media hub as China seeks to stamp out dissent. Owner Jimmy Lai, currently in jail for attending democracy protests, was among the first to be charged under the law after its imposition last year. But the final chapter of the 26-year-old paper was written over the last week when authorities deployed the security law to raid the paper's newsroom, arrest 6 staff members, and freeze its assets. Now, that last move crippled the paper's ability to conduct business and pay staff. On Wednesday, Apple Daily announced its closure out of consideration for the safety of its staff. China imposed its security law on Hong Kong last year to stamp out dissent after the city was convulsed by huge and often violent democracy protests. Authorities said their prosecution of Apple Daily was sparked by articles and columns that allegedly supported international sanctions against China, a view now deemed illegal. It was the first time reporting and opinions published by a media outlet in Hong Kong had triggered the security law.
In other news, Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab blasts China for using a national security law to stifle free speech in Hong Kong after the closure of pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily. The forced closure of Apple Daily by the Hong Kong authorities is a chilling blow to freedom of expression in Hong Kong, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said in a statement. It is crystal clear, he said, that the powers under the national security law are being used as a tool to curtail freedoms and punish dissent rather than keep public order. He said that demanding China respect its obligations over Hong Kong's 1997 handover from UK rule.
In other news, U.S. Senate Republicans torpedoed a Democratic effort to protect voting rights and expand ballot access for all Americans. A flashpoint issue months after an election marred by Donald Trump's allegations of fraud. Waving off broad bipartisan public support for election law updates, the opposition party united to block the advancement of a sweeping package which would amount to the most expansive federal election reform in decades. Take a look.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam President.
You said the big lies about states repressing their votes. Are you okay with states like Arizona that's conducting its own audit to throw into question Joe Biden's victory there?
I'm okay with the states sorting this sort of stuff out. You know, the most important election in the country is the presidential election. It's not decided in Congress, it's decided in the Electoral College. Those are state-by-state decisions. And so, regardless of what may be happening in some state, there's no rationale for federal intervention. They'll figure it all out. They'll go to court. They'll determine whether or not there's any rational basis for this. That's not unusual in this country.
The Republican leader uses the language and the logic of the Southern senators in the 60s who defended states' rights, and it is an indefensible position. And yet that was the reason given for why Republicans voted in lockstep today. Regardless of what may be happening in some states, there's no rationale for federal intervention. That is both ridiculous and awful. All we wanted to do here on the floor was to bring up the issue of voting rights and debate how to combat these vicious, oftentimes discriminatory voting restrictions.
Now, Democrats have accused Republicans of caving to Donald Trump's pressure about mail-in voting and other expansive voting rules and targeting the ways that younger, poorer, non-white, and typically Democratic voters access the ballot. The Democrats wanted a compromise by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. He's proposing that voter ID be required across the country, and that could be a utility bill or a driver's license, 15 days of early voting, and automatic registration of voting, as well as the right to vote early or by mail-in ballot, methods sharply curbed by the Republican states. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump himself continues to launch attacks on the 2020 election process using provocative language that critics say is intended to raise doubts about America's voting system. Mr. Trump said the 2020 presidential election was rigged. The defeated president seethed in a Tuesday statement.
Now, from a vantage point in Mexico, people look across the southern border of the United States to seek greener pastures across that invisible line to seek asylum or opportunity in America. We have a report from Eagle News correspondent Fanny Valdez, who spoke with someone who hopes one day to become an American. Watch this.
Gracias and hola from the Lone Star State. I'm Fanny Valdez with the latest updates in the South Texas border region.
Venimos a bendecirles con este pequeño obsequio de parte de Dios para ustedes.
Today, we visit the town of Reynosa, Mexico, across the U.S. border from the city of McAllen, Texas. Here, we can see hundreds of asylum seekers in tent encampments hoping for the chance to seek refuge inside the United States. Last Wednesday, Texas Governor Greg Abbott had held a press conference in Austin where he announced plans of the state to rebuild the border wall, which followed the governor's border security summit the week before in Del Rio, Texas, where the governor brought together law enforcement, city and county officials, and landowners to discuss ways to secure the border and keep communities safe. Meanwhile, local charity groups and organizations in Reynosa are working with refugees who are seeking asylum. We spoke with one of the asylum seekers, Noemi from Honduras, who is currently taking shelter in one of the camps here in Reynosa.
Okay. Estamos en Reynosa, Tamaulipas, okay, con Noemi. Muchísimas gracias, Noemi. Noemi, ¿de dónde vienes? Honduras. De Honduras. Ok. ¿Cuánto tiempo tienes aquí esperando?
Aquí tenemos ya casi 3 horas, los 3 meses.
3 meses esperando. ¿Cómo piensas tú cruzar o cuál es tu esperanza para ir a los Estados Unidos?
Bueno, supuestamente, primero Dios, estamos anotadas en una iglesia y nos están ayudando a conseguir asilo. Entonces estamos anotadas ahí, entonces estamos esperando el llamado de eso.
Con la aplicación para el asilo, para poder cruzar
para cruzar al otro lado, porque ya muchas personas de aquí ya han cruzado.
Sí lo han hecho, pero es una larga fila porque vinieron muchos, ¿verdad?
Sí, claro.
Ok. Solamente quiero que vean el campamento.
In Edinburgh, Texas, I'm Fanny Valdez, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Vivimos en tiempos interesantes.
Thank you so much for your report, Eagle News. We'll be back with more updates. Until go away.
Protect yourself and loved ones. Use Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant that kills 500 strains of bacteria, fungi, and viruses such as coronavirus and other disease-causing microorganisms. Also potent against viruses in pets. It kills 99.9% of the disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes. Dissolve 1 teaspoon in 1 liter of water. Apply on areas for disinfection or use it for misting. Protect Plus Gold.
Give me sanity. I need my sanity. Time to live in harmony. Give me back my sanity. Give me back my sanity.
Hey guys, this is Marky Strong. Please catch me on Letters and Music on air and online this coming June 26th, Saturday, 1 and 2 p.m. only here on Net 25. See ya.
Ang trabaho naman talaga ng maritime group ng PNP is to enforce the maritime laws.
Tayo lang yung stricto, pero in other parts of the country, pwede na naman ang tourism.
Definitely, we are ready to respond to a possible spike.
Sapagkat ang aming intensyon ay makatulong lang sa mga tao na wala talagang magamit na gamot.
92 voted for this resolution, which will make it stronger, calling on the Justice Department to come up with more stringent ways to be able to avert these hate crimes against Asian Americans.
Mas marami po tayong magagamit ngayon na mga tools or mga equipment.
Maraming salamat, Weng, at sa buong puwersa ng Balitalakayan sa pagkakataong ito.
Tatalakayin ang mga pangunahing balita live sa teleradyo ng Net 25 at Radyo Aguila DCEC 1062. Kasama si Weng de la Fuente sa Balitalakayan.
We live in interesting times.
Welcome back. Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez has thanked the Japanese government for approving the disbursement of 20 billion yen or 8.71 billion pesos under the second phase of the post-disaster standby loan package extended to the Philippines to assist in its coronavirus pandemic response efforts, especially in providing emergency assistance to vulnerable sectors. Dominguez said the 20 billion Japanese yen will help meet the Philippine government's huge financial requirements when it distributed agency cash aid to families affected by the Enhanced Community Quarantine or ECQ and the MECQ that were imposed in the National Capital Region and nearby provinces on March 27 to May 14 of this year, following the surge in COVID infections in these areas. The 20 billion yen disbursement, which the Philippine government received this month, represents the third tranche of the PDSL-2 loan extended by Japan International Cooperation Agency or JICA to the Philippines last September.
Now, 5 years on from Britain's shock decision to quit the European Union, analysts say its far-reaching changes are only just beginning. Here's Ashley Espiritu for more. Ashley.
Thank you, CJ. Yes, 5 years on from Britain's shock decision to quit the European Union, the wounds opened by Brexit have yet to heal, and analysts say its far-reaching changes are only just beginning. The coronavirus pandemic has masked the economic dislocation caused by the referendum verdict, which backed 5 decades of integration with the European mainland. British trade with the EU collapsed at the start of the year when Brexit's full effects came into force, but against a backdrop of much deeper damage wrought by COVID-19. And the benefits promised by Prime Minister Boris Johnson for a newly invigorated global Britain remain a work in progress, while the country's very cohesion is at risk from a nationalist movement in pro-EU Scotland. Johnson was upbeat on the effects of Brexit in comments marking the anniversary of the June 23, 2016 referendum. Prime Minister Boris Johnson stated that now, as we recover from this pandemic, we will seize the true potential of our regained sovereignty to unite and level up our whole United Kingdom. He continued saying that with control over our regulations and subsides, and with free ports driving new investment, we will spur innovation, jobs, and renewal across every part of our country. This government got Brexit done, and we've already reclaimed our money, laws, borders, and waters, he said. Johnson also hailed the trade deals negotiated with the EU and 68 other countries, as well as the start of negotiations to join the $9 trillion Pacific trade area. Back to you, CJ.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much for your report. But just a quick question. 5 years after, what effects does the withdrawal of the UK from the EU has on the Britons?
Well, CJ, for most Britons, the fuller effects remain to be felt with the coronavirus restrictions curbing their travel to their favorite holiday destinations this summer. For the first time in generations, Britons no longer have unrestricted entry to Europe. In Britain, at least 5.3 million long resident Europeans have applied for settlement status to ensure their pre-Brexit rights are preserved, well above the government's estimate of 3.5 million. Any remaining Europeans have until June 30 to apply, raising the threat of new battles with Brussels if some slip through the net, after London was accused of harshly treating EU citizens trying to enter the country legitimately. The sheer numbers involved amount to a massive demographic change, said King's College London economics professor Jonathan Ports. Ports said that it will have very long-running social, cultural, political consequences long after Brexit and free movement are over. Ports also said that Brexit would give Britain's economy a slow puncture with a significant but not catastrophic, persistent drag on growth of 0.25% a year for the foreseeable future. Back to you, CJ.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for your report coming out of the UK. Please do take care over there and just tell us if there are any more developments happening there.
Thank you so much, CJ. Thank you for having me. I'm Ashley Spiritu reporting from London, United Kingdom, and we live in interesting times.
British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, along with South Korean, Singaporean, and Vietnamese counterparts, attended the ASEAN-Europe meeting, or ASEM, High Policy Dialogue in Hanoi. And they discussed various issues, including trade, the fight against COVID-19, and climate change. UK Foreign Minister Raab said the UK have started talks to join the CPTPP trade treaty. Take a look.
We warmly welcome the signal from ASEAN leaders that they will accept the UK's application to become a dialogue partner. We're starting negotiations to join CPTPP, and we've put a major focus on the Indo-Pacific in the context of the G7 presidency that we host this year. And I think joining the CPTPP will provide a boost economically for all sides. It's a high-quality win-win multilateral trade deal. But it's also a boost to the principle of free trade as we work with others to try and help shape and reinforce future trading rules. I think it's also an important signal that CPTPP and the region can send to other countries.
ASEM partners have continued to do our best to keep our economies open and to integrate our economies and to continue to stand for the cause of free trade, despite the political opposition, accentuated by the fears brought on by COVID-19.
Now, the start of talks to join the CPTPP, made up of 11 countries with a combined 500 million people, came as the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, made his 5th visit to Southeast Asia. The UK also looks to promote closer ties and trade relations with the region following Brexit. Now, the UK is also looking to attain dialogue partnership status with the 10-country or ASEAN nations as it pursues a tilt toward the region in response to China's growing influence on the world stage that was recommended by a recent UK government review of defense and foreign policy. Now, according to South China Morning Post, following Vietnam, Mr. Raab is to visit Cambodia and then end his trip to the region in Singapore.
In other news, U.S. airlines are scrambling to ramp back up to meet soaring travel demand that has transformed America's airports from cavernous to crowded almost overnight. The surge in pent-up demand is exposing immediate staffing shortfalls in the aviation workforce, as well as medium-term labor challenges, following an exodus of experienced workers during the downturn. The issues came to a head over the weekend when American Airlines canceled 400 flights and said it would cut 1% of its flights in July to better manage an incredibly quick ramp-up of customer demand. While American was more aggressive than rivals in adding capacity, all major carriers face challenges in the sudden rush, according to analysts. They've had so many planes just waiting in hangars or runways that weren't being used. There's a lot of maintenance, said Ian Gandler, Executive Director of Research at Value Line. It's not an overnight thing, he said. The surge in bookings and the economic recovery are fantastic things for the airlines, but they have to execute, he said.
Tehran warned today that Washington's seizure of 33 websites run by Iran-linked media was not constructive for ongoing talks on bringing the U.S. back into a landmark nuclear deal. The U.S. Justice Department said it had seized 33 Iranian government-controlled media websites, as well as 3 of the Iraqi group Kataib Hezbollah, which it said were hosted on U.S.-owned domains in violation of sanctions. We are using all international and legal means to condemn this mistaken policy of the United States, that according to the director of the president's office, Mahmoud Vaizi, telling this to reporters. The 33 websites were held by the Iranian Islamic Radio and Television Union, IRTVU, itself controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, or IRGC. Both the IRTVU and IRGC have been placed on the U.S. sanctions blacklist, making it illegal for Americans, U.S. companies, and foreign or non-American companies with U.S. subsidiaries to have business with them or their subsidiaries. Kataib Hezbollah, the Iraqi group which owned 3 sites that were seized, is a hardline military faction with close ties to Tehran that Washington has formally designated a terror group.
Now in sports news, no alcohol, no hugs, no cheers, and no autographs. Tokyo Olympic organizers unveiled tough new rules for spectators at the pandemic games on Wednesday as they marked 1 month until the opening ceremony. Take a look.
心から歓喜をといいますか、喜んでいただき、そしてなるべく大きな声を出さずに歓喜の輪になるべくいていただかないようにというような、そういったさまざまな工夫をしながらこの東京大会をより安心安全で乗り切っていくために努力をしているところで。
Games chiefs decided on Monday to allow up to 10,000 spectators into competition venues, but Hashimoto warned them not to expect the kind of festive mood currently being enjoyed by football fans at Euro 2020. Spectators will need to clear several antivirus requirements, including temperature checks and mask wearing, just to get into venues, with no refunds available for those who can't. Once inside, they are forbidden from cheering or making direct contact with other spectators and will be asked to go straight home after events end. Asking athletes for autographs or expressing verbal support is also a no-no, as is waving a towel or any form of cheering that could create a crowd. With the July 23 opening ceremony nearing, organizers are scrambling to finalize preparation and win over a skeptical public, pledging the games will be safe for locals and participants.
Meanwhile, a second virus case linked to the Ugandan Olympic team has been detected after a coach tested positive on arrival in Japan, according to a city official today. The announcement comes as Olympic officials mark 1 month until the pandemic-postponed games open in Tokyo on July 23. Japanese national broadcaster NHK said the second positive case was an athlete, but local officials declined to confirm. On Saturday, the Ugandan Olympic coach tested positive upon arrival in Japan, and despite the team reportedly being vaccinated and testing negative before travel. The rest of the delegation has now been put in quarantine until July 3.
DeAndre Ayton made the go-ahead catch and dunk with 1 second left And a bloody Devin Booker scored 20 points as the Phoenix Suns shocked the Los Angeles Clippers 104-103 in a Game 2 of their NBA playoff series. Booker shook off a cruel clash of heads that left him bloodied and bruised, returning to the game as the Suns took down the Clippers in a seesaw fourth quarter to win their 9th straight and seize a 2-0 lead in the Western Conference Finals. Ayton scored the eventual game winner in a thrilling finish as the Suns perfectly executed on their final possession of the game. The play started with an inbounds pass by Suns forward Jay Crowder, who lobbed it directly to the front of the basket where a leaping Ayton was waiting. He caught and then dunked the ball in one motion to give to the Suns a 104-103 lead with 0.7 seconds left. Clippers' Paul George then put up a desperation shot at the buzzer, but it hit the front of the rim and bounced harmlessly away to end the game in front of the crowd of 16,000 at Phoenix Suns Arena. If Game 1 in the series was feel-out game, then Game 2 was the knockout punch. Booker had his nose bloodied late in the third quarter when he accidentally butted heads with Clippers' Pat Beverly.
Must have been exciting to watch.
Yes, we did watch that game here at the Filipino Arena. Everything stopped with that 0.7 second shot. That was really glorious to watch. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Again, coming to you live here at the Philippine Arena. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
Okay, you have to tell me all about it. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.